It is April Fool's Day, but luckily, America as a joke ended on January 19th. And while the pro-terror kids on college campuses, the paid-off influencers on TikTok, the Rachel Zeglers of Hollywood, and Tim Walz's weirdo daughter would have you believe Gen Z is made up of radical leftists, that's not actually the case. In fact, Gen Z is shaping up to be the most conservative generation in decades. Another indicator is just how many young people are ditching the Ivy League schools of the Northeast for the more conservative SEC schools of the South. I mean, the choice between mass green hairs calling for global intifada and hot sorority girls calling for a patriotic party could not be more stark. But Gen Z, like any generation coming of age, is very fickle. Can President Trump and America First mega principles keep their support and attention? Well, when I last spoke to Clarkson Lawson, he was on board with Meg and on board with the Trump vision for America. But I've been told since the inauguration, he has shifted his support. But why? And can we change him back? I have a feeling we can. Let me bring him in, internet personality Clarkson Lawson. All right, Clarkson, we got to dive into this here. First thing is first, did you vote for President Trump in November?
I did not. No, I voted for Kamala Harris at the top of my ticket and Republicans in the House and the Senate. I split my ticket.
Ouch. Okay. So the last time I talked to you, you were maybe not 100% sold on Donald Trump, but you were attracted to conservative principles. Now, what you did is actually the opposite of what a lot of people did. They voted for Trump at the top of the ticket, and maybe they voted for other Democrats down ballot. So you flip-flopped those. You voted for Kamala.
Right.
I'm not going to laugh. Okay. But I have to ask you, why did you make that decision? What was it about Donald Trump leading up to the election that turned you off?
Well, I mean, I think that it was a lot. You know, I started out super conservative and then I became an independent. And then when we spoke, I was kind of going back and forth, teetering on who I was going to vote for. But I think Trump's foreign policy is a big one, and also his economic policy. I'm staunchly against broad tariffs. I think that he's a little bit weak on the world stage, and I know that that's a talking point that a lot of conservatives like to use in support of Trump. But I don't think it's necessarily projecting strength to our adversaries if we're picking fights with countries that we're previously aligned to, pushing them further to align with our adversaries. So there's a lot of different things, and none of it had to do with really any social issues, which a lot of people think that my vote for Kamala would somehow have to do with like me being gay or like identity politics. And it really had nothing to do with that. It was a lot more about substantive political issues.
Okay, we have a lot to dig into.
Yeah.
Let's dig in. You mentioned that you don't think President Trump projects strength on the world stage. Obviously, I disagree with you wholeheartedly.
Yeah.
But are you referring to Ukraine specifically, or Israel, or which one or which area, or both, are you specifically talking about?
Well, there's a specific moment in the debate where, because I used to say that same thing that you did, where Kamala Harris said, you know, leaders manipulate you through flattery. They want you to be in office. And then Putin endorsed Kamala Harris. But as we both know, you know, Russia was paying conservative media companies and funneling that money to influencers to get Trump elected. So in my mind, I go, okay, well, if Trump is this strong leader and our adversaries are so scared of him, why do they want him in office? And that's when it started to just show me that these leaders aren't necessarily scared of Trump. They might look at him as erratic and be fearful of his actions in that way. But I don't necessarily think that projects strength. I think it projects instability, especially to the people that we're aligned with. So it's going to push the countries that we previously worked with towards our adversaries like China, and maybe not Russia because of what's going on in Ukraine. But I do think that Trump being so erratic is pushing Europe, at least, to have a stronger relationship with China.
So do you see any realm here where maybe the European countries and some of our other allies have been taking advantage of America and the American taxpayer, and that maybe President Trump stopping them in their tracks and saying, you're our allies, but we're not going to foot the entire bill? Do you see any promise and maybe that message? Do you see any strength from that kind of a narrative?
Yeah, you know, two things can be true at once. It's not that I necessarily disagree with the premise of Trump's argument. I disagree with the solution he's presenting to it. I think the solution is worse than the problem itself. You know, Europe wanting to entirely decouple from the United States when it comes to trade, places like Canada and him being erratic on Twitter. I don't think that that's how a president should be conducting business when it comes to negotiating deals with your allied partners. Even that Zelensky meeting was a disaster. And I'm sure people find it funny, and there were parts of it where I chuckled a bit, but this is the president of the United States. And I think that a little bit more decorum and responsibility is needed when you're trying to work with these countries who are reliant on the US. And that's not by mistake. They're not just taking advantage of us. We put our hand in Europe. We put our hand in these nations because we want them to lean on us. Because if they lean on us, then they look to us when they need something. We don't want them looking to China. That's why we do humanitarian aid. And a lot of people on the left, they completely miss that point when they're arguing for things like USAID or our assistance with Ukraine or Israel. But it's not because we just want to be good people and help out these countries. It's because we want to be the center for global influence. And if we decouple ourselves from that, we need to be very careful because somebody else will come in and replace us.
Okay, so I'm going to acknowledge your perspective. I completely disagree with it, but I'm going to acknowledge it. So listen, I think that there is a sense of what you're saying that has some truth to it. There's a reason that these programs exist. It's called soft power. I'm in full understanding of it. However, the fraud and the abuse and the nonsensical spending on some of these programs is just so egregious and so ridiculous, particularly the DEI spending. And that's why I believe a lot of it was cut off, because there was a lot of people, and I actually have spoken to people who actually work in philanthropic organizations trying to benefit places like Africa that are like, listen, these aid workers, they live in the most expensive places. They go to the best parties. They make huge salaries. And then the people that they're actually supposed to be helping are not receiving any of the benefit of this. So it's become like a slush fund for a lifestyle for people who work in the aid industrial complex. And it's actually not helping advance the goals of these people that we do want to see the good in our values and in traditional American values. We hope that they see that, but it wasn't going to that purpose. So that's on the USAID. On the Ukraine stuff, I mean, if you look into President Biden and who you wanted to be president, Kamala Harris, was what they were doing just an endless supply of money? Was that working? And if not, do you think that Trump approaching it from a different perspective might be worth taking a look at?
I think it's worth taking a look at, but I do think it was working because Ukraine wasn't positioned to even really be able to put up a fight against Russia if it wasn't for us. So I would say that, yeah, us supporting Ukraine did work. Now, when it goes to USAID, I'm never going to be somebody who thinks there's no fraud or corruption in government. At the end of the day, left or right, the government's bloated and I can't stand it. But if there's fraud, then they should be charged with fraud. And I think that conservatives use the term fraud very loosely because nobody's been charged with fraud. Yes, there's the way the money's been spent may not be preferred, but is it fraud? If so, bring it to court.
Listen, because you can't say that somebody taking a huge salary and living in a fancy apartment in Africa, you can't say that that's fraud. But
that's not the legal definition of fraud.
Well, most people would look at that. If you're not going to call it a legal definition of fraud, most people would look at that and say, why are we funding luxurious lifestyles for supposed aid workers? So that, in my opinion, would be abuse. Would you concede that that's abuse?
Yeah, I think there's abuse I think there's abuse of our tax dollars in every single government organization. But is the solution to shut down the organization and relate it to the reason why we are in a deficit when actually we're in a deficit because of Medicare, Medicaid, and defense spending? No, I think that's
well, wait a
misleading
second
the
here.
public.
You wanted us to keep supporting Ukraine in perpetuity with no end in sight to the war that they could not win without our aid and support, by the way.
Most of what we sent to Ukraine wasn't actual liquid cash, Tomi. It was weapons. It's not like we were just writing checks. And I think
that comes from the Defense Department, doesn't it?
Right. Yeah. So if that's what we're going to cut, but that's not liquid cash. I'm talking about cutting Medicare, Medicaid, or defense spending, but liquid cash has to be cut. We were sending them a lot of old military equipment that we weren't even using.
As well as money and resources, and also propping up the pension programs for their government employees.
Also, but two things can be true at once. I can advocate for defense spending to be cut while also supporting that. It's just I don't agree with cutting that part of defense spending because I think that it puts us in a global position that is important to America keeping its place on the world stage. So it's not just because I want defense spending cut doesn't mean that I have to support cutting defense spending for what you agree with.
Right. So you don't want to cut defense spending from Ukraine, but you're okay cutting it from the United States military endeavor?
It depends on what it is. I don't work in the Defense Department, but I do think that supporting Ukraine is important.
Okay. Forever? Are you good with that war
Not forever.
just keep going on?
No, not forever, but I don't think that anybody's okay with war going on forever.
So what's
I don't
the
think
solution then? And I do want to move on because I have so many things to talk to you about, but I think this is really interesting from your perspective because, you know, as somebody who's in Gen Z, for me, I'm a millennial, right? So I grew up in the invasion of Iraq and Desert Storm and all this. Like, this is all fresh, you know, in my mind, having lived through all of this and an endless war. So when I look at Ukraine and Russia, I also see an endless war. And as Trump has pointed out multiple times, there's thousands of people on both sides that are dying, and for what? So obviously, there's going to be two things that are going to happen. Either we're going to negotiate and we're going to bring Russia and Ukraine to the table and we're going to have some kind of a peace deal that maybe both sides are going to have to make some concessions, but we end an endless war. Or Ukraine's going to lose because we stop supporting them in perpetuity. Or there is a third option. We just continue supporting them and this just goes on and on and on and on and on and on and on. Or we're going to put boots on the ground and we're going to fight Russia, which, I mean, you want World War III? I certainly don't.
No, not at all. But I don't think that we have to stop working on negotiations while also stopping supporting Ukraine. I feel like you're advocating for cutting all support for Ukraine, but then you're also saying we should be negotiating the end of this war. We actually agree here.
But we are negotiating. But you said you didn't like the way Trump was doing it. But he's currently negotiating, and I thought that the rare earth mineral idea was a fantastic one because
I don't disagree.
Okay,
I don't disagree. I didn't necessarily say I disagree with everything that Trump is doing on it, but I'm saying the way that it's being handled, I don't necessarily agree with on, you know, everything else. But the thing is that when we go to the negotiation table, I don't want America giving too much to Russia when Russia's our adversary and Ukraine is not. You know, Putin, he has ambitions to restore Russia to its former glory. And the fact that he wanted Trump to be elected and he was paying influencers to get him elected should put red flags in everybody's brain to think, why is it that he wanted Trump elected? Is Trump just going to, you know, give him what he wants? And that's where my concern is. And that's what my concern is with the Ukraine and Russia war. I want it to stop. Everybody wants it to stop. But I don't think that the solution is to cut off that funding before we can reach a point for that.
Right. Well, I think Trump has said over and over again that Ukraine doesn't have the cards. So they've got to make some kind of a deal. And the rare earth deal was a great one because it allowed American interests in the area without just endless support that we weren't getting anything out of. So I thought that was a great idea. It's really sad that he rejected it, I think, for his own purposes. But I want to move on because we have so much to talk about. What is your take and what is your temperature read on the deportations? Are you in favor? Are you against? I have a feeling you don't like the tone and tenor of the way it's been carried out, but you might surprise me. You might surprise me. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I'm not as affected by tone and tenor as you may think. But you know, I'm all for deporting criminals. I feel like liberals should also be for that. They were for that like 10 years ago. Problem is, we need to make sure that we are doing it the right way and we are following the law and we're respecting checks and balances. And I think that people get frustrated with the way our government works because sometimes it's inefficient by design. You know, judicial processes can slow down what you want to happen, but I don't think the solution to that is to ignore it. And I think that that's my biggest issue with it. It's not necessarily that I want these people in our country. I just want to make sure that Trump respects the judicial branch as much as he flexes his own executive power. That's all.
So do you think that these judges that are sitting in D.C. or San Francisco, do you think that they should be able to make a nationwide decree on something like immigration, which is an executive duty? Do you think that they should be able to make a sweeping injunction that stops the president?
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, that stops the president from carrying out his role and his duty as the chief executive of our country and our commander in chief. Because I think that's what a lot of people have a problem with. And this is going to go to the Supreme Court and they're going to fight this out. Yeah. But a judge sitting in San Francisco or a judge sitting in D.C. saying, oh, you know, the president doesn't have the ability to deport people. That's where a lot of folks are pretty frustrated because they're able to make sweeping decrees that essentially stop the president from carrying out an executive function.
Yeah, I mean, the president's role is also to follow the law. So I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to sit on here and pretend like I am a lawyer. However, what I will say is that it's not necessarily about stopping deportation. It's about stopping the government from doing it in a way that is not legal. And I think there's a very big distinction there. I don't think a judge should be able to say, no, you can't deport anyone. But I do think a judge should be able to say that the way you're deporting this person does not follow the Constitution and does not follow the law. Therefore, they should be able to put a preliminary pause on it to make sure that there's no injustices that happen while the government is essentially abusing the law or allegedly abusing the law.
But do you think that illegal aliens, especially criminal illegal aliens, do they get the same constitutional protection as an American citizen?
How are you going to know they're illegal without due process? So yes.
Well, they know that they're illegal. They know that they're illegal. They're not pulling American citizens off the street. So
okay.
They know that they're illegal and they're
right.
being deported. And many of them have final deportation notices that have been in the system for years.
Right. So if you're following the process in which the law allows, then sure, get deported. But if the federal government starts to not follow that law, yeah, the judicial branch should be able to put a check on them.
All right, I want to move on to similar topic, but in the same vein, same vein as that. What do you make of the Trump administration and our Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, saying, listen, if you're here on a student visa and you're advocating for Hamas and global intifada and you are actively stoking, you think that they should be out? Okay, well, we found an agreement area.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't want terrorists in our country if they don't have to be.
So Mahmoud Khalil, all the uproar over his removal and his deportation, you're okay with that?
I am okay with him being deported as long as the government is following the law in how they deport him. That's it. I have no problem with the basis of the Trump administration's argument. I just want to make sure that they respect the judicial branch in verifying that they're doing it the right way. That's all.
Okay. So last little thing on this border issue here, because you voted for Kamala. So border crossings have gone down 96%. We went from having hundreds, if not thousands, of gotaways per day to one or two or zero. So you voted for Kamala. Kamala was, of course, the official or unofficial, whatever you want to call it, border czar. She was supposed to address the root causes. President Biden said he couldn't put a control on the border without congressional action. But we have President Trump, through just executive order, who has been able to largely secure our border in a matter of a couple of months. You voted for Kamala. Do you think she would have done it?
No. And I knew that when I voted for her.
And that didn't bother you?
It does. It absolutely does. When you pick a candidate, it's not about picking and agreeing with everything. And that was the major issue that made me go to the ballot box and go, I don't know. But I sacrificed that issue knowing that Trump would follow through with what I necessarily agree with. I think the problem in American politics nowadays is that when you pick a candidate, it's assumed that you necessarily can't support whoever wins when they do something that you agree with, or vice versa. But the thing is that that's not what went into my vote. I weighed all of the factors and I put them in place, and then it led me to Kamala. But that doesn't mean that I can't say, yeah, Trump did good on this thing.
It's a pretty big thing. I mean, it's no small potatoes.
It is. No, I mean, immigration is a really big deal. And I think if the Democratic Party went back to even what Obama was doing, I mean, he was the deporter in chief. They'd be doing a lot better right now, and Trump wouldn't have had much to run on. But liberals have ceded so many common sense issues over to conservatives that it's made them wildly unpopular.
Yeah. Well, we're going to get to that, but I do have a curious question. What do you think a President Kamala would have done thus far that would have been better than what President Trump has done thus far?
I don't think we would be putting tariffs on. We would be doing broad tariffs. I don't think that our alliances with, Canada and other countries would be being decoupled right now. I don't think that we would be taking our hand out of influencing global politics and handing it over to our adversaries. I don't think we would be leading the public with a bunch of misinformation about how much money Doge is saving. Because that's been a whole mess. Doge is the Department of Government Efficiency, but they haven't been very efficient in what they're talking about. So I think there would be plenty of other wins, but there'd also be a lot of losses, including the border.
Yeah, that's a pretty big one, the border.
It's a big one. No, I know. And I'm happily okay with saying I voted for Kamala, but I don't agree with her on one thing or on a few other things, especially, women's sports.
Okay. Well, I'm glad that you brought that. I'm glad that you brought that one up. Democrats are right now, they don't really have a leader I don't think it's Kamala. It might be AOC. It might be Jasmine Crockett. I want to get your take on that too. But do you think right now, I don't know if you consider yourself still an independent, but the Democrats they're struggling right now. I mean, by all accounts, struggling right now. And they're picking some really weird hills to die on, men and women's sports being one of those. Why do you think they're doing it? And are they going to lose people like you who did vote for Kamala?
You know, conservatives have had it, like I said earlier, they will take an 80-20 issue and they will paint Democrats in opposition to it. And they take the bait every time. This is an issue that is just blatantly common sense, women's sports, things like that, that I think Democrats are going to be forced to move back on. Because even when you look at the census and what is it, 2030, that's going to push the country more right. Democrats don't have a choice but to move back to common sense. But I think that the problem is that over the last 8 years, identity politics has infiltrated the party to the point where if a minority says anything, they take it. And they're like, oh, yeah, that's totally true. Not realizing that minorities can be stupid, too. So maybe we shouldn't be listening to these radical activists at nonprofit organizations and letting them dictate policy. I was an athlete, so this is an issue that I take a pretty big issue with. I know the differences between my body and a biological woman's. And so do, 90% of the American public.
Yeah, it's weird. But listen, they've been given so many opportunities to shift to a more common sense position. And the couple that they've been eaten alive for it. So, listen, I think that there is a common sense position that the Democrats can find, but so far they have no willingness to find that common sense position. So I think it's pretty interesting. So coming up in 2028, who are you looking at? Or who are you looking at for the Democrat Party? Who do you want to run?
I'm just sitting back and taking some time away before I figure that out, because frankly, I don't like anyone. And I think that that's my biggest problem with politics is that I don't trust anyone. I don't trust MAGA. I don't trust Democrats. So I'm going to wait and see what's presented. Obviously, I'm an independent and I live in Florida, so I don't get to vote in those primaries. But let's wait and see what candidates run on. Candidates change their mind, including conservatives. So we'll see what positions they start to lay out before that comes.
Yeah. So question for you too. Tomorrow is Liberation Day. I know that you're opposed to the tariffs, but if in fact, and there's going to, everybody has said, whether you support them or not, hey, there's going to be maybe a little bit of a pain period here because in order to make big changes.
Not on the campaign trail. That wasn't said on he ran on Biden causing all of that inflation.
He's been very honest about tariffs initially, saying, listen, there might be.
Not on the campaign trail. He ran saying he was going to lower the cost of goods, Tomi.
Well, he has lowered the cost of goods. Eggs down, gas down. The prices are coming down.
Eggs were up because there was a bird flu outbreak.
Well, but they blamed it on President Trump, didn't they? Didn't they? When they weren't coming down
yeah, they
within
did.
the
And
first
they're
day
wrong.
of inauguration.
Tomi, two things can be true at once. That's the thing. But what is the truth here is that egg prices were high because of bird flu. Yeah. Trump's administration kept the same culling policies in place. So that's just a non-issue to me. But the thing, you can't run on lowering the price of goods and then implement broad sweeping tariffs and say, well, you guys, you're going to struggle a bit right after the American people just saw the highest inflation they've seen in their whole lives.
Thanks to Joe.
So, I think it's hypocritical. It's not the time to be doing tariffs like this.
There's never going to be a time. But here's my question for you. Because
maybe not after we just had 10% inflation. I think that there might be a better time, Tomi.
Well, here's my question for you.
Sorry, go ahead.
My question for you is this. Now, we're going to see this play out, right? And I think you got to go all the way. I don't want them to stop halfway through. I think that the reciprocal tariffs, I think they're also a bargaining tool. Do you think it's fair that other countries place high tariffs? So for example, Canada, you mentioned, placing like over 100% tariffs on our dairy products. Do you think that we should just let that continue? Or do you think this idea of reciprocal tariffs, and Trump has already said we're not even going to do reciprocal anymore in a lot of the cases because it would be so harsh. But do you think looking at other countries and saying you're giving us tariffs of this amount, so we're going to give you tariffs of this amount, you don't agree in principle that maybe that might be a way to make things a little bit more fair for lasting change in terms of our trade deficit?
I don't think that when you're talking about trade, we should be talking about what is fair, because it's a little bit more nuanced than that. I think that those countries that are putting tariffs on our goods are doing so at their own detriment, because I don't agree with those tariffs that they're doing. And I also don't agree. I believe in free trade. So when countries are putting all of these tariffs, I don't think it's good for them. I believe in tariffs, on specific industries in your country, maybe if you want to make sure they're made in America. But no, I don't think that Americans need to make sure that we are getting our lumber from America when Canada has all of those forests that can easily get the lumber from it. So no, I don't think we should be worried about what's fair. I think we should be worried about what's practical, and what's best for America. And frankly, I think broad sweeping tariffs aren't that.
If it comes to a place where we end up having more free trade because these other countries back down, and
you think the government's going to give up that revenue, Tomi? We know the government's greedy.
Which governments? The foreign governments?
Our government, who gets the money from tariffs. You think they're going to lower those tariffs and give up that money?
Trump has already said reciprocal tariffs. Listen, you lower your tariffs, then we'll lower our tariffs. So he's already made that very clear.
So you're trusting the government and saying, yeah, we'll lower it.
I'm trusting President Trump in his process with tariffs. I am.
I don't trust it, but go ahead.
Okay, well, we're going to have to wait and see. I mean, neither one of us can say for certainty how this is going to shake out. I happen to think that I'm tired of being ripped off by the rest of the world, and I think the rest of the world needs to understand that they don't have the cards. So they want to slap us with these big tariffs, then guess what? You can't do that when you're the Chihuahua in the dog park and you've got the Doberman over here. But unfortunately, for too long, we've been pretending that we're also Chihuahuas, and we're not. I love a Chihuahua, by the way. I have one.
But I was going to say Chihuahua slander. No,
yeah, no, I love Chihuahuas. But listen, I think we're going to have to wait and see how this plays out. And we don't know what's going to happen. But I think that trying something different instead of just business as usual, I think that's another reason why people are not really excited about the Democrat Party right now, because the Democrat Party is essentially just resisting any change, and they just want the status quo. And when the status quo was actively voted against in November of 2024, you can't just stick status quo and expect people to be cheering for you. Last thing I do want to talk to you about, though, is this Tesla terrorism. Yeah. I would assume that you think that's ridiculous.
Yeah, absolutely. Violence in any form shouldn't be tolerated. I understand why people are angry at Elon Musk, but I'm not considered to support people terrorizing, throwing feces on cars. I do want to add, though, don't you think it's interesting how you just described conservatism when it comes to liberals and then liberalism when it comes to conservatives? Because you said conservatives are the ones who are trying to initiate all of this change and being open to it and just hoping that the reaction is good. Whereas liberals are wanting to conserve the institutions because they don't just want to change things and break things because the solution might be worse than the problem. So don't you find that a little bit interesting? Because that's one of the things that make me go, okay, I don't even know where I stand, because this is completely antithetical to conservatism. It really is.
I disagree with you in part. I do think President Trump is a new kind of conservative. I think President Trump looks at things.
Well, he's not a conservative. He's a populist.
Well, in some ways he is. But I think that President Trump looks at things and he says, okay, we've been doing this for this long and we haven't gotten the results that we want. So what we can do is we can continue doing this and just hope by some miracle it gets better, or we can try something different. And I would think as a young person that that's attractive to you, because young people are supposed to be pragmatists. Like, listen, why would we keep doing the same old thing over and over again and expect a different result? So there will be things that we might have to try and fail at, but there will be things that we will try and we will succeed at, and it will fundamentally change the way we do business in an America first way. Now, oftentimes when this is tried, it's putting the rest of the world over America. This is the reverse of that. So it's nationalism, it's populism, it's mega conservatism, which is a whole new brand. And I agree with you that it is. But it's a brand that a lot of people were very excited about. And he built a coalition that conservatives haven't been able to build.
Absolutely. No, I don't disagree with you there. I just think that, again, the solution to the problem can't be worse than the problem. And I think that a lot of these things, especially when it comes to tariffs, they don't have to be worse than the problem. I understand wanting to, focus on manufacturing when it comes to, let's say, prescription drugs that are made in China, especially adversarial. If we're buying a bunch of products from our adversaries and not putting any tariffs on them, that's a problem. But just painting, getting the tariff paintbrush and saying, putting it on everything, to me, it's intellectually lazy, and it lacks the nuance that's needed to not make the solution to the problem worse than the problem. Well, that's it. But we agree on more than you may think.
Yeah. And I also think that if you're being honest with yourself, you know that Kamala is a god-awful mess. You know it.
So is Trump. Yeah, absolutely. I'll admit it.
I would disagree with you on that because, okay, I promise this is the last thing I'm going to ask you about.
Yeah, it's okay. No, it's okay.
Do you, because this is very interesting to me. It's like a real live case study. And I like that you exist on a spectrum of ideology. I love that. I think more people should, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I'm not into tribalism. I disagree with conservative principles. I disagree with mostly liberal principles. But listen, we all exist
that's
on a
why I
spectrum.
watch your stuff. I've always respected that about you.
I appreciate that. So I do want to ask you, in terms of transparency with the press, do you appreciate when President Trump sits in the Oval Office and takes freewheeling questions from the press in a way that Joe Biden didn't through his entire term?
Absolutely.
Is that something you appreciate?
Absolutely. Yeah, I can say confidently that I appreciate Trump's candor, that he's being transparent, but I just wish he was more thoroughly researched, and as well as Caroline was more thoroughly researched before they start being as transparent. You know, I mean, even when they were talking about releasing the Epstein files, that wasn't a release of the Epstein files. That wasn't transparency. So I think that transparency should be applied both ways. And this administration is only doing so when it's in favor of them, which I get. It's politics. You have to make yourself look good. But if you're going to invite influencers to the White House and you're going to have this podcast media row, invite some Democrats. Don't just invite conservatives. That's not transparency. That's just, using transparency as a way to give yourself the upper hand. So, yeah, I'm sorry, that's a long-winded response, but I want to provide nuance to it and say, yes, I appreciate that about Trump, but his administration, I don't agree, is the most transparent ever.
I do believe they are, especially compared to the last one, when you got no questions, very few press conferences. And your candidate, Kamala, I mean, she had to prep herself for weeks and months to do an interview. And what
it comes down to is, would you rather go and do an interview and make sure that you have the right answers, or do you want to go and do an interview and word vomit in the way that Trump does every day?
I know you got to be honest with me. You don't think when Kamala talks, it's a word vomit? You think that she speaks clearly and concisely?
I never said that she's the smartest woman on the planet and that she's the most articulate. But what I'm saying is that the premise of your argument is that you want authenticity and honesty from a politician.
Yes.
I want that too. But I also want them to be prepared, and I don't want them to be inflammatory, because I think it's regressive and it takes us back to the point where we're not getting anything done in politics. Trump is like that. So what I'm saying is, if you're going to ask, well, should a politician be waiting and prepping for an interview? I think Trump could prep a little bit more, and I think Kamala could prep a little bit less. There's the nuance. You know what I mean? And that's where I exist.
More or less is going to help Kamala much. I don't know if there's much that can help
maybe,
her. But
yeah.
Listen, I hope that you come back on over to this side, but I always appreciate the fact that, you see things on a sliding scale, and that's okay. And I hope more people will, because it takes some deep diving and some investigation to find where you land on certain issues. And it's great to be open-minded to all points of view. So I appreciate having you. I hope to have you back soon. Plenty more for us to talk about, I am sure. And we will have the discussion on Liberation Day, post-Liberation Day. We'll give it a few weeks. We'll see how it shakes out, and then I'll bring you back and we'll have the conversation. Also want to note that you're in a great red state of Florida, so it sounds to me like maybe the conservatism is still in your blood.
Maybe a little bit. I'm an independent, so just a little.
Independent in Florida, not an independent in California. Thought I'd bring that up, but I appreciate it, and please do come back soon.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
All right, folks, you know how Democrats keep saying that Elon and Doge want to rob Granny and Grandpa of their earned Social Security? Well, it turns out it's actually Biden's precious migrants doing that, and I have some final thoughts. The repeated, tired, and debunked line out of the left as to why they so vehemently oppose the efforts of Doge is that Elon and his team want to cut off Social Security payments to the elderly. Well, last week, the Doge team addressed that issue with Bret Baier, in case you missed it.
At Social Security, one of the first things we learned is that they get phone calls every day of people trying to change direct deposit information. So when you want to change your bank account, you can call Social Security. We learned 40% of the phone calls that they get are from fraudsters.
40%?
That's right. Almost half.
Yes, and they steal people's Social Security is what happens. Is they call in, they say, they claim to be a retiree, then they convince the Social Security person on the phone to change where the money's flowing. It actually goes to some fraudster. This is happening all day, every day. And then somebody doesn't receive their Social Security.
I highly recommend watching that entire interview, by the way. You can watch it on Fox Nation. But point is, Doge isn't looking to cut off grandma and grandpa and those who have paid into and earned their benefits. Doge is looking to cut off the fraudsters, the abusers, and yes, the illegal aliens who are taking advantage of us all.
But this is what jumped out at us. When we saw these numbers, we were like, what is this? In 21, you see 270,000 people, goes all the way to 2.1 million in 24. These are non-citizens that are getting Social Security numbers.
Yeah, this is a mind-blowing chart.
Yeah, just this literally blew us away. Like, we went there to find fraud, and we found this by accident. And this isn't political, by the way. My parents are immigrants. Yeah, this country's been great to us. My brother and sister all born in Spain. I'm pro-legal immigration. This is not political. This is not political. This is about America and the future of America. Look, if I hadn't seen this myself, I'm not sure I'd have believed it. I went through it myself and mapped it, and Elon is right. This is true. The defaults in the system, from Social Security to all of the benefit programs, have been set to max inclusion, max pay for these people, and minimum collection. That's what's happening. We found 1.3 million of them already on Medicaid, as an example. We've gone through, on every benefit program we went through, we found groups from this particular group of people, this 5.5 million people, in those benefit programs. And then what was really, really disturbing us was why. We're asking ourselves why. Right. And so we actually just took a sample and looked at voter registration records. And we found people here registered to vote. In this population, yes.
And who did vote?
And we found some by sampling that actually did vote. And we have referred them to prosecution at the Homeland Security Investigation Service.
Yeah.
Already.
Yeah. According to Doge's deep dive into all this, over 2 million non-citizens received new Social Security numbers in fiscal year 2024. It gets worse. Over 4.8 million non-citizens have received new Social Security numbers since fiscal year 2021, when Joe and his auto pen were in office. Shocking, I know. And due to defaults put in place, many of these illegals were getting max benefit payouts. Now, this is really tricky to swallow because while federal law prevents non-citizens from getting Social Security or Medicare, those deemed to be of lawful presence, remember, Joe granted a lot of them that privilege as well as mass parole, well, they're able to get Social Security benefits. So Joe let millions come in, get on the system, and cash in on benefits paid for by you and I. This should infuriate you. So the next time a Democrat flaps lips about Doge stealing your Social Security or a green hair lights a Tesla on fire to protest Doge's mission, you remind them that it's not Doge robbing the elderly of their due payments. It's Biden's illegals and other fraudsters who are bankrupting those programs. Doge is simply trying to stand in their way. A thank you is all you Democrats should be saying, and those are my final thoughts. Please be sure to tune in live tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern. Catch full episodes of this show on outkick.com and Fox Nation whenever you like. Please do like and subscribe to the YouTube channel at Tomi Lahren is Fearless. From Nashville, God bless and take care. Hey, thanks for watching. If you want more of my hottest takes, must-see conversations, and of course, my final thoughts, click here and make sure you subscribe here so you never miss a beat. I'll be here every weekday, and I hope you'll join me.